Hello everyone, welcome to Learning AI Together by Wingo Kids. Today we'll focus on our first lab session. In this lab session, you will learn about how to build a basic chatbot, how to connect it to an LLM model using APIs, and third, check how much tokens that chatbot has used. Before we actually start building our chatbot, let's first understand how the process works in the backend. So Anthropic has created this 5-step request flow to show how exactly chatbot gives a user response. Starting with first, the user will query something to a chatbot. That request will go to the server that you have created. Then, that server will forward that request to an Anthropic API. There will be some of the model details, API keys, and everything that will be sent from server side to an API. Then, what exactly happened in the API? So, API will tokenize the request, then conceptualize to understand what exactly a user is asking. Then, finally, a output will be generated. That generated output will be then tokenized and send it back to the server that we have developed. Then that server will send that response back to an user. Until now, we understood the lab exercise, then know the theory behind how exactly chatbot works. It's time for us to get our hands dirty. So first thing first, you will need an API key to access any LLM model. So here are the step-by-step procedure about how to generate API key. You can also refer to our last video where we have talked about this in detail. Now that we understood the assignment, it's time to actually start coding. First thing, you will need to copy your API key into .env file. This will help you to keep your key to yourself only and not to push it into a public domain. Now, to get us going, we need to install some of the dependencies like installing Anthropic Python.env library. This will help us to access the API key that we stored in .env file. Now that we have all our dependencies successfully installed, let's start loading .env file into the code. This is the file where we have stored our API key. The next step is creating API client. So basically for this we'll leverage Anthropic library, then create an Anthropic client and we'll use Cloud IQ's 4.5 model for this specific chatbot. For a specific chatbot, selecting a model is a personal choice as well as depends upon what different kind of inputs and outputs will go to a chatbot. To know more about this, you can refer to the Cloud's API documents where there are different sets of terminologies as given that will help you to choose a model. For a specific model comparison, you can see out how Opus, Sonnet, and Haiku are different from each other. For this specific use case, our main goal was creating a basic chatbot. That's why I am using a Haiku's 4.5 model, which will give you the fastest response and will consume less tokens. Now it's time for us to create the output function. Before we go into a code, let's first understand the theory behind it. So in this specific chatbot, you can see there is an user message and assistant output. Before we deep dive into create function, first understand the terminologies that we have used out there. The first thing first, you have to specify the model that being used for a specific chatbot. Then we will give maximum tokens limit. This will help us to cap the length of response. Then there will be an actual user query that will go into a picture. So for our chatbot, after specifying everything, this is the query what we have. What is the Manchester United Stadium called? When we are running this create function to see the output, you have get everything that goes into a backend, like everything, like what's the role, how's the assistance giving you output, how many characters, how many, which model that I have used, when it has stopped, why it has stopped, everything. But you just wanted to see what's the answer that model has given for that specific question. So here your Python skill will come into handy. So if you see the message in the content content window, you get a text message like that's the answer of whatever the question you have asked. So we are just sourcing that specific by indexing. So that's the answer you are getting. So for a question that we ask, what is the Manchester United Stadium called, we are getting answer as Manchester United Stadium is called Old Trafford. It has been their home since 1910 and is one of the largest and most famous football stadium in the world. Now see, we have asked a basic question but we got like a 3 sentence output. So the length of output will depend upon how many tokens you have utilized given for a create function. So till now we understood how exactly chatbot responds to a specific question. But when it comes to a practical scenarios, chatbots are meant to answer the series of user queries. So before we deep dive into what exactly happens in this helper function, let's first understand the theory behind it. So for a specific Anthropic API or any model that you will be building based on the chatbots, one thing that you should be noting. When a user send a response, then you will get an output from a model. But for a subsequent query, model doesn't store anything in its output memory. So what you have to do, you have to provide first query, whatever the output is generated, then the second query, so that model will get to know the context about what the conversation is happening. So it's time for our chatbot to answer a series of a question. So what we learned from the theory, we have applied in this line of a code. So what we are doing, we are creating an empty list called message. In this empty list, first we will append the first question, then add assistant message will help us to append the response generated for a first question. Then there will be a second user question like how many people can it hold. So this question is based upon whatever the answer we are getting from a first question. So based upon whatever the logic we have seen out there, we have to give a series of all the memories of all the conversation what we have been doing with a model. So that's been taken care by this message function. And finally, for a second question, we'll get answer as Old Trafford has a capacity of approximately dash 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 people. So until now, we understood how exactly our chatbot responds to a set of questions as well as a single question. Now it's time to make our agent live. Before we do that, let's quickly sum up what we have learned till now. So to summarize whatever we have done till now, we first imported the API key into the code, then set up the server API client account, then use this helper function just to provide context to a model exactly what's happening from a series of a question. Now, to keep your chatbot running until the user asks the question, we have leveraged while loop. So what's exactly happening out here? Until and unless user stop asking question, your model will be running and will generate the outputs. Now we have come to the final stage of doing practical demo of whatever the agent we have built till now. Before that, I just wanted to show you something. This is my dashboard of usage of tokens for a specific API request that I had. So these numbers are not related to this project, but just for from my previous whatever the work I have done. I just wanted to show you this because post the demo of whatever we have built, we just will see how exactly the input and output tokens have been changed. So let's start our demo first. So we will be running the agent code. So at the bottom, you can see it's the latency about how the API is getting connected to your whatever the chatbot you have built to the models that has been suggested within the code. During the running phase, you can see at the top, you got an input window where you can input the first question, whatever you wanted to ask to an agent. So we are checking who is the best player from the Manchester United. So at the bottom, you can see the answer has been generated that Bruno is the best player, but the model is stating it doesn't have the context about at what type and what performance exactly what we are asking for the best about. But that's okay. We just wanted to see how exactly the model is responding. Then we'll ask the second question. The second question is about how long he played for the United. So here you will definitely get about the cutoff time period for the model we have used. So that model has only inputs till April 2024 and it will show you the different outputs, whatever the questions what we have asked. So that's how a basic chatbot will work. First, here you can see what the user is asking, then you will get first response from the model, then model will take the response output as well as the user query and then the second user query from the user just to set up the context what exactly we have been discussing out here, and then finally we'll get the output. Now please remember we have built the while loop out here, so we have to interrupt the kernel to stop the process. So while it's getting interrupted, I will show you that till now what we have done. So we have built a basic chatbot that talks with an user queries total complex set of questions what we are asking. So the series of answer will come from your basic chatbot. So that's how we have built the chatbot, utilize the basic anthropic model, some of the helper functions that help us to keep going, and then finally creating a while loop to keep the conversation going. Now it's time to check how many tokens it has been consumed. So we have somewhere around 600 input tokens and 750 as an output tokens. When we are refreshing the usage dashboard, what we can see out there to generate these kind of responses as well as take the response whatever the questions we have asked, the model has consumed somewhere around 125 tokens and for an output around 150 tokens. That's because if you can see the code clearly, we have limited the max token size to an 80. So this will depend upon how much the length of output or the length of input questions or length of output that's been generated from an agent will depend on. So you can just rework on whatever the questions or whatever the agent you have to build on the first chatbot, and you can iterate on models as well as max tokens. And here we just talked about like a 2 or 3 question sets out here, so you can continuously chat about whatever the questions you have for your specific model. That's all for a lab 1.